This abuse dynamic between myself and the Human Awareness Institute, and by extension, the template of relating between the community, the team, and the concentrated power body of the facilitators and the satellite, largely rubber stamping support of the board, has a couple of different dimensions to look through. And the first one is beliefs. One of the things that's, I guess, innate in human behavior is that we all act emotionally based out of a paradigm of beliefs. And one of the things that I think is most significant here is the belief or the lack of belief in competence, in the ability to win. When I asked for help from Peter Sandhill and he withdrew and said that it wasn't his issue and didn't have time and all of that, it's not, what was interesting was he had time to prop up his psychic vision of me getting married to a very inappropriate person. He had lots of time and bandwidth for that. And I'm guessing he thought he could win to kind of guide two very incompatible people into marriage. But he didn't have any time to address the abuse dynamic. And the question is why? And I think fundamentally, we like to win. We're a culture that likes winners. And one of the things that we do is act very bizarrely when we can't find a way to win. Men classically don't ask for directions because receiving help would be weak. Admitting that we don't know what we're doing would also perhaps look like weakness, and so let's pretend the problem doesn't exist. But I think central to the large thrust of energy that I've received from the facilitator body is a belief that we can't face this terrain. We can't help you. And so we won't. We will say that it's not our issue. We will say there's no issue here to be helped about. And I do think that's a very significant underlying belief to the behavior, because I think we're basically good people by nature. And I do not believe in the fundamental flaw of any of the facilitators. And so if you have a mission statement that is committed to helping the whole world win, personally committed, and one of your core clients is losing, a client who's worked with you one-on-one, who's worked with you in over 10 years with 100 events, and they are failing. They're sick, they're dying, they're suicidal, and now they're sexually abused and traumatized by one of your facilitators. The mission is very clear. How can we help you win in this situation? Well, I would like an apology. I would like to understand this won't happen again. I want you to understand why it was so devastating to have Peter do this and this. I want you to understand how it feels to have all of you train and recommend this man and then be so hurt. And I want you to understand the impact it's having on my life, and I want to know that you're there for me. If you believe you can be there for someone, who wouldn't do that with such a mission? But if you believe you will fail, if you don't have the competency, that's when the male chauvinism gets in of saying, no. We're a public nonprofit who has a focus of healthy relationships, but we have lower sexual ethics standard than even a school district, than even the government. That's the schizophrenia, that we've got going on. On my own side, the biggest crisis of belief comes from being raised in a New Age family that was very shadow averse, much like high in many ways. And that was so frightened of any form of aggression, healthy or otherwise, that, it really sunk in at a very deep level that aggression of any kind was bad, was scary, was unlovable. And in a violating family, healthy aggression would have been to stand up for myself. But when standing up for yourself results in shame and fear and withdrawal and projection of the parent shadow, the child comes away with this idea that aggression is bad and unlovable. So this put me in a very interesting dynamic with the facilitators, where the more they violated healthy ethics in a variety of different ways, the more healthy aggression was necessary and appropriate to say, hey, you don't get to abuse me and then get to abuse me for being abused and then get to cover it up, yet another form of abuse, just so that you don't have to deal with your own incompetencies and then go out and claim your mission statement as a public nonprofit. No. So this is healthy aggression. It was aggression, however, intended to secure support for the regressed child that had been traumatized into regression by severe psychological therapeutic incompetence in a professional context by Peter Sandhill. The bind that kept hammering me to bits was the fundamental certainty by my inner child that aggression was unlovable, bad, evil, blah, 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 blah. And the fact that my facilitators did not have the ethical competency and inner guidance to actually walk their own truths and understand that if you are a public nonprofit getting tax breaks to help people learn healthy relationships, if you don't think it's your number one priority to correct, one of your own core team sexually, psychedelically, spiritually, and therapeutically violating a key client, you don't know what you're doing. And that's even worse than admitting you don't have the resources, etc. If you really don't know what you're doing in that terrain, that's a complete disaster. And if you know what to do, you just don't have the resources, that's a partial and tragic, disaster, but you're a little more, a little bit more sane. The high facilitators have told me that this was not a high issue and would not apologize for any of their role. So they're in the very crazy terrain here, which demands a strong, assertive response. But the more assertive I become, the more convinced I become that I'm evil, bad, and unlovable, which is being mirrored by the fear, by the hostility, by the anger, and the lack of love by my therapists and facilitator body. This has, and to some extent continues to be, an absolute core crisis in belief. Similarly, the belief of the team and a lot of the participants that they could change the core power structure of high was very weak. So the team, to the extent that they engaged, did so on condition of not confronting the facilitators and not even being visible. And that pattern is again based on a belief that a single team member can't change the power structure, but they will be punished by the corruption of the power structure, much like the dynamics of the Clintons right now, where Hillary is ganging up on certain people that supported Bernie Sanders. You will be punished if you challenge any degree of corruption. And of course, the corruption was on Hillary's part in trying to very underhandedly deny Bernie Sanders something that he had legitimately earned. But then the attack goes to anyone who, it's a very schizophrenic dynamic, but it often ends up punishing the person who tries to do the right thing. Edward Snowden tries to do the right thing, and he's made enemy number one with Joe Biden calling embassies around the world, revoking his passport, making him a Russian refugee. Imagine that, a Russian refugee, because he had the audacity to tell us the truth, that all our phone calls and stuff were being listened to against the Constitution. He followed his oath to the Constitution, not to the power structure. And so we have this tension of beliefs. Then we have the dimension of trauma, which I think is one of the most important things. Because on the one hand, in my 30 lover relationships within the high community, symptoms of trauma were present in every one of those relationships. Actually, let's delete 3 of those. Let's say out of 30 lover relationships, symptoms of trauma was present in 27 of those relationships, in one or both parties. Now, they were present in me because I developed complex PTSD in childhood, in a culture that is trauma illiterate. Thus, being able to work with 4 high facilitators and take, 30 high workshops, attend 100 high events, and not learn a single thing about trauma. Not learn the symptoms, going to this healer, and again, demonstrating symptoms, not learning about them. So this is tremendous illiteracy. Now, when I engage with high participants, on team and not on team in lover relationships, they demonstrate significant trauma symptoms in a large number of relationships, and they don't know what it is either. And so there's this disconnect and there's failure. There's not a commitment to everyone winning. There is a certainty of failure in a trauma illiterate populace that is highly traumatized. And so there's failure here, there's disconnect here, there's craziness here, there's denial here. But it has no name. It's not called trauma coping strategies because there's no paradigm for trauma in this school in which everyone is supposed to win, but not have the technology to do so. And so you have a little bit of schizophrenia there. I've focused more than anything else on trauma, and it is noteworthy that when I recommended the body keeps the score to the facilitators and asked them to introduce this into high as an obvious blind spot, Jason Weston's response was, trauma isn't our focus. And of course, that is the answer of a trauma illiterate individual. Because if you're committed to anyone winning, in a highly traumatic culture, traumatic repair and understanding is your number one focus. But if you're ignorant about what trauma is, and ignorant of the fact that if even one person in the relationship has PTSD, you are guaranteed to lose. Both people are guaranteed to lose without some trauma management skills. So if we understand the degree of trauma in our culture, and you understand that if even one person in the relationship has trauma, in that in most cases both people have some degree of unresolved trauma, you understand why the vast majority of relationships will not be sustainable in a trauma illiterate paradigm. But someone who is trauma illiterate does not understand that. And so the disconnect of saying we're committed to everyone winning, but we're not committed to addressing the primary issue that is preventing us from winning can go invisible. In the same way that most of you and I would understand that it would be a little bit schizophrenic for Greenpeace or Friends of the Earth or Oxfam or whatever to say we are committed to a sustainable, beautiful, clean, environmentally friendly world. That's our commitment. At the same time, we're not really interested in understanding or dealing with plastics. Petroleum products, not really our thing. CO2, that's the energy department. Toxic waste, municipal dumps and all that, not our thing. We're just committed to having a green, sustainable environment. We would laugh at the schizophrenia of that. But in a trauma-illiterate culture, the laughable nature of being committed to win-win without understanding trauma and traumatic coping mechanisms, its correlation to addiction, is just as laughable, but it's foggy, because when you're dealing with the blind talking to the blind, nobody knows what they're doing. But it is striking that I am not in healthy relationship with a single high participant after 30 workshops and all of that. And that traumatic overlays penetrated, that this was at least as much on team, if not more. I think I met more sexual abuse survivors on team than off of team. And they didn't know what they were doing. As one team member who said, basically, I like to have lots of, violent, anonymous, sex, and then try and hurt the man emotionally. And that was her truth, and I really appreciated her sharing that to me so that I could avoid having sex with her. But she did not have a geographical framework for understanding that this is common sexual abuse behavior, why it happens, and what to do about it. And just as importantly, I didn't have any framework to help her either. Now we go to ethics. I think this is another area I've kind of dove deeply into. But the terrain of ethics, the practices that lead to everyone winning and the practices that lead to everyone losing. You cannot be in an organization that has one of the loftiest mission statements of anywhere on the planet, a commitment to the whole world winning, while simultaneously doing things that guarantee that everyone will lose 99% of the time. Having a sexual relationship with a therapist is one such thing. Everyone loses, as we can see. People are losing and losing and losing, and that will lose, and everyone will lose until people grasp the data set and change the behavior and make amends and respond, as opposed to covering it up, lying, pretending it's not a high issue. So ethics is a very deep dimension. Then we have chauvinism, and the essence of chauvinism in a materialistic culture is embodied in gender. So you have male and you have female. If you're a chauvinist, you must think men are more important than women. And there's a fair amount of that which is thankfully changing in most of the world. But the deeper form of chauvinism in its more holistic sense is an overvaluing of masculine energy in men and in women. So what does that look like? It's clients bragging about their daughters who are bad asses. Well, what's a badass? Well, you should see how many men are working under her. So you have, first of all, the concentration of masculine energy. Masculine energy is centralized power. Feminine energy, decentralized power. So within the masculine paradigm, there's got to be someone on top, and that has traditionally been a male. And the value of the person is how many people are underneath them. Subservient, dependent, whatever. And those are then in the feminine role. You have the leader, masculine, the followers, feminine. That's why in a chauvinistic culture you want to train your children to be leaders, but not followers, which is very interesting because it sidesteps the competency issue. If you've got a world-class rock climber and someone who's never climbed a mountain, but you've trained your children that to be leaders is what's important, they're going to try and lead that expedition so that they can feel important. They just don't know what they're doing. Whereas if you teach people to be good followers, the first step in deciding who's going to lead us in this terrain is who has the most competence in vision and understanding of the various technologies involved in this terrain. And you gratefully follow someone who knows more than you do, because your odds of success go up, and you relinquish and you step into leadership when you have that competency. There is not, in other words, an unethical competition for leadership where the competency is fudged because you're in a cult where if you're in the leader position, you're important, and if you're in the following position, you're not. That's a deeper expression of chauvinism. And so chauvinism is a very deep thread that laces throughout all of this, and it's a core dimension. The next thing is this thing, called love. And we've divorced it from a great deal of meaning, paying lip service to its importance. But love is one of those things that is a feminine energy. It's a feminine emotion, in part because in the polarity between, for example, feeling and acting, more external, more yang, more masculine; feeling, more internal, more individual, in a certain way, more subjective, more feminine. Feelings, this is why feelings are universally scorned in chauvinistic cultures. This is why boys are teased for crying. They're teased for being feminine by allowing feelings to show on their body. It is considered shameful within the paradigm of chauvinism for a man to be emotional, so he has to work to hide it. And so in the paradigm, in this tension here, love is the feminine energy. So, of course, it is not studied at all because we show great disdain for feminine energy. We don't even have a cogent definition for it. We can go to a workshop that is in the room of love without having a definition for what love is. We can say, as a facilitator, I love you, and I am here to support you, without knowing what support and love looks like and without having a cogent definition. And one of the interesting things in chauvinism is it's an artificial breakdown of equal polarity. So, for example, the yin and the yang are never drawn asymmetrically. They're symmetrical and they're balanced. But chauvinistic cultures try and pretend that the feminine is hardly worth anything and the masculine is very important. And so they don't deal with the integrated nature of masculine and feminine polarity. You don't deal with the fact that, for example, if a plug is masculine, you've got two objects sticking out, the receptacle is feminine, you don't get electricity unless you connect the two. If men are so important and women are not, you don't get men or women unless you connect the two. Every single man, these important people, have come out of a female body for the entire history of time. It is scientifically irrational, but culturally dogmatic to pretend in the face of such evidence that men have ever been or will ever be more important in any objective way than women. But who says we're an intelligent cult? And so in this framework of love, you see, love and competency go hand in hand. They are the polarity. The masculine polarity and counterpart of love is competency. And they are an integrated circle, like everything else that's masculine and feminine. So when you love something sincerely and meaningfully, you care about it. If you do not care about it, get a new definition of love. You don't love it. If you care about it, you look at it. If you look at it, you develop intimacy. You develop awareness. You start to understand it. When you love something enough to care about it, enough to look at it, enough to understand it, and develop a sense of intimacy, you develop understanding. And when you develop understanding, what understanding is simply a pattern recognition filter that says, oh, You know, if someone loves studying ants, for example, oh, the ant travels out, they give the message through their nose and hairs here, they do this, they do this. Oh, interesting. You understand someone. You say, oh, this person, has to avoid this fear because it's too big for them. Then they do this, then they do that, then they self-sabotage over here, then they do this. You understand them. And when you understand someone with love and with caring, you feel compassion for their limitations, for their stuck places. But you also empathize. Understanding being birthed out of love leads to empathy. Empathy is the acknowledgement that you're like me. And there's the reason that love makes this particular journey is that in order to have intimacy with anything and to understand it, we use what's called mirror neurons. And the way that we use mirror neurons is we simulate the other person in order to understand them and have feelings for them. So, for example, if the other person is abusive, the abuse has two polarities. You have the abuser and the victim, and they both form a synergy. You can't abuse someone if there's no victim, and you can't be victimized if there's no abuser. You know, there's a count. You know, they fit together. And to understand an abuser, you have to understand the victim and you have to understand the abuser. And the way that you do that is through imagination with feeling. What would it feel like to do this? And we use our mirror neurons to extend parts of our brain cells. We put them into a fictional representational relationship that mirrors the person we're understanding. We say, what would I have felt like if my dad had shamed me every time I had a feeling? But then when I grew up, women complained that I was a shit because I didn't have feelings. Well, how would I feel? Would I feel torn apart? Would I feel crazy? Would I feel like if I have feelings, I'm shameful, but if I don't have feelings, I'm punished and criticized? How would that feel like? And you put yourself in that situation and you think, gosh, it's a fucked up system. You're punished if you do it this way, and then you're punished over here by a different group if you do it the other way. There's no way to win here. Gosh, what a lot of stress. And then if you were under stress for 10 years because there's no way to win, how depressed would you be? Oh my goodness, gosh. I understand you. I empathize with you because I see you. And the way I see you is I put a part of my brain cells through the simulation of your life. And I cross-reference that with the times that I've felt in a double bind and the times where I've been shamed for an innate part of my being. You know, on the one hand, you have shame, a deep trauma that says you are unworthy and you don't belong. That's why it's a trauma. Because if you don't belong, you're not safe. You know, in the hierarchy of human needs, you have survival, security, love and belonging is number 3. And in a culture that is deeply interdependent, if you don't love and belong, you are not secure in your survival. You're a few steps away from death and bankruptcy and all that because no one's going to fight for you. This is a very big crisis. If you understand that you will be shamed for an innate part of your being. You know, when boys are shamed for their tears being part of the scientific instrument that is the human heart, which refracts through emotional colors the environment and the paradigm in which the individual or the heart exists. So the heart is just giving out readings, just like a calculator. If you're in a sociopathic environment and you have this paradigm and this belief, the color shows up this. If you type 2 + 2 × 8, you know, you've got 4 × 8. That's what you get. And the heart spits out accurate information. But when accurate information is shamed. Imagine you're a calculator and someone says, what's 2 plus 2? And you say 4, and it hits you on the head with a hammer. And you say, and it says again, what's 2 plus 2? And you have to say 4. It hits you over the head. This is a tremendous crisis within the psyche when you're in a dogmatic, shame-based cult that punishes you for innately who you are. And every single one of us has felt that hammer blow. Some repeatedly into trauma and PTSD, others just get me out of this hell in which my being is fundamentally going to be shamed, traumatized, because my cult is too dumb to understand the mathematics of the psyche. Not because there's anything wrong with the fact that a calculator says 2 plus 2 equals 4, or that a heart says helplessness, hurt, betrayal, and severe pain equals hate. In fact, if you want to look at someone who's in severe hate, just see, where are you helpless? Where have you been betrayed? Where is your deep pain? And you'll, okay, that's what's producing that reading. It's scientific. It's predictable. And then you have people that transcend hate, but they don't transcend hate by fucking with the instrument such that they feel love and joy when their wife is being raped. That's called dissociative, crazy, sociopathic. No, they do it by transcending the fixation of the identity that is in this physical body. In other words, if someone feels joy and healing in the presence of great helplessness, betrayal, and deep pain, and people aren't responding, it's not because their human heart doesn't produce the feeling of hate for that reality. It's because, to some extent, they've transcended the reality and they're being present to a larger reality, in which this is just a small part, which is why the higher self, the more transcendent teachers amongst us, see the suffering here, and they have compassion for it. But they have the hope and the joy that sees it in a much larger context that is beyond the typical ego framework. And so you can have deep pity for your abuser when you have transcended the human ego to a point where you understand that they are in as much pain as you, that they don't know it. They're transferring it to you. They're transferring a wound they don't know they have, or they do when they're in enormous pain. And then you have pity for your abuser, and you don't take on the virus. Because behind every virus, every abuse is the message, you're worthless, you're not lovable, you're not valuable. These are the viruses that come in through the form of abuse. Because we try and stay sane, and we say, if this person cared for us, they wouldn't shoot us in the head. That's not what you do when you care for someone. If this person cared for us, they wouldn't cover up the secret of our abuse. They'd focus on healing the wound. If we're with a broken leg and asking for help, they'd help splint the wound. They don't run away and say, I never heard of you and I don't know your name. And so those things produce within an egoic framework the whole spectrum of emotions, in that case, hate. And you don't judge it. But in our vagueness about what love is, so we've now got from love to care, from care to seeing, from seeing to empathy through the mirror neurons, from empathy to understanding, from understanding to compassion and more caring, deeper caring, stronger love. Love is growing this whole time. Out of love, care, and understanding comes a response. And in a loving framework, that response is always to assist in reducing the pain, stop causing more pain, and growing the blossoming, the love of the other individual. And the best kind of clear discipline way to cut through so much of the fat and ignorance of our cult around the word love is the hierarchy of human needs. Every single human being in the history of humanity has needed to survive, has needed to feel secure in that survival, has needed a sense of love and belonging, has needed to develop self-esteem, has needed to develop their unique and individual gifts and talents, has needed to bring those out into the world and create inner abundance by being recognized and honored for those gifts, and outer abundance by sharing those gifts, thus creating kind of the middle-aged period of life, of secure abundance and blessing the cult that gave you so much when you were young. You're now blessing and returning to the cult your gifts and talents that you've nurtured and developed. And then finally, as one gets older or more sophisticated in meeting one's hierarchy of needs, the need to transcend, the need to go beyond the individual mission of me, to actually leave a legacy of love, beauty, and goodness that is beyond the self. This is a human need. Now, if you are helping, if you are loving someone, you are engaging with them in a way that facilitates their journey to meeting their human needs, which is the same thing as realizing their potential, which is the same thing as blossoming into their fullest self. If you are helping someone to blossom into their fullest self, you are loving them to one degree or another. You may only have the skill to help someone survive. You give them a bowl of soup. You may only have the skill to help someone secure their survival. You don't really know. You've never dealt with survival yourself, but you can tell them how to start a retirement account and this and that and the other. Or you give someone a sense of love and belonging that helps them understand that who they are is valuable, lovable, etc. So in this framework, that's what love is. So as one responds in such a way as to accelerate the individual being loved on their journey to meet their human needs. If they are in survival, you give them support so they survive. If they are in security, you help them develop more security. If they are trying to feel like they belong, you support them in validating. You may bring them into your community. You may honor some part of them that you value. You read their book and appreciate them. Whatever it is, you help them feel that they belong. You invite them to the table. And you develop self-esteem. What are your values? Who do you respect in the world? What are your values? Are you living up to them? What's stopping you from being the person you value? Is it a faulty belief, a sociopathic partner? What's stopping you being the person you want to be, and how can I help? This is what love is. So we've gotten now to the response to be loving. Now, everything improves with trial and error, and so you need a feedback loop. How am I doing? Do you feel more loved as a result of this action? Oh, I thought I was being loving. You feel less loved. Oh, please help me understand you again, because I obviously created a faulty model in my projection of who you are based on the arrogance of projecting the past onto the present. Tell me who you are. Okay, so I got it wrong here. I got it right here. Okay, here we have deeper understanding, deeper intimacy. And then you have another response. How am I doing now? And it's not, are you cool or are you not cool? That has nothing to do with love. That's where you are on the sociopathic, empathic spectrum. It's is your survival going up? Is your security going up? Are you proud of who you are? Or, for example, you just gave me a bowl of soup and I'm ashamed of myself because the person I want to be is someone who works and earns their own stuff, and you just made me feel small by giving me something. I want a job. I don't want soup. Ah, I see. So what helps you be the person you want to be is you'd like to earn the soup. I see. Okay. All right. Well, I've got this project for you to do. Let's help you weed this garden, do this, clear the firewood out of the national park, etc. And then, as payment, some soup. How about that? Or money, and then you buy your soup if somehow you've been brainwashed into believe that people giving you gifts is weak out of the chauvinism of the cult. Well, then, here you are. Well, when you succeed in helping an individual successfully to progress along their human needs, to become the person they want to become, they feel happy. That's what you feel when you meet your needs. They feel happy. They feel grateful. They feel excited. They feel hopeful about the future. And voila, they feel love too. In other words, the end of successful loving goes through the stage of competency. Meaning, if you don't understand someone, if you're sure you're right when you're dead wrong, and you influence someone and you actually increase their pain because you don't know what you're doing and you don't know that what you're doing, then they do not feel happy. They do not feel grateful. They feel resentful, particularly if you're asking them to appreciate you for how loving you've been. They feel resentful. They feel hurt. They feel confused. Why are you pretending to help me when you're making things worse? You know, all this type of stuff. And so there's no competency. The point is that the cycle of love and competency and love, is not complete unless you go through the full cycle. If you don't love enough to care, go fuck yourself. That's not love. That's whatever it is. If you don't love enough to see the person that you say you love, that means taking time, by the way, and that means asking questions, and that means noticing and paying attention and observing. If you don't love enough to see them, go take your definition and shove it. Because we don't need more of that craziness. We got it in childhood. So there is no love that does not emerge in competency. Competency to what? To facilitating the acceleration speed towards meeting our human needs together in a win-win framework. There is no love without competency. And competency produces success. Success at what? Meeting your human needs. Meeting one's human needs creates happiness and gratitude towards those associated with fulfilling those needs. Yourself and the people who supported you, who loved you, who succeeded, who gave a damn, who didn't just give up and throw in the towel because they weren't loving themselves or you. They were loving their self-importance. They wanted to look good, so they were at the dinner table and they said, try this diet, it'll sort you out. And I don't want to learn about you and understand whether you've tried it or not. I don't want to hear your values. I don't want to hear what you like to eat. I don't want to just do that. And if it doesn't work, it's your problem. Don't tell me about it because I'm important. Yeah, that creates a high degree of failure, which is why we hate advice givers in our culture. They very rarely take the time to care and understand. It's not love, it's self-importance. Masquerading as love, attention and all that, to play the masculine role, because it is masculine to give advice. It is feminine to receive advice. So in a chauvinistic cult, everyone likes to give advice because that increases their social rank. And no one wants to receive advice because that's feminine, and we wouldn't want to acknowledge that there was any femininity within the equally balanced psyche of masculine and feminine energy. We're in our own craziness to compensate for the cult's craziness. Now, the love and competency dimension is very important because the Human Awareness Institute is populated by a barrage of expressions of the word love and a very mixed bag of competency and incompetency. And the areas of incompetency are being bundled and packaged as love because you got to do something with them. And in a shame-based culture, you don't admit that you don't know what you're doing. And you certainly don't ask for help. So you have to control the information so that even incompetency can be repackaged as love, and marketed as such. So that way you make money when you're being loving, and then you make money for abusing, which is to assert influence with incompetence in a way that damages someone's human needs. So as a direct result of numerous therapeutic violations, my survival decreased substantially. My security of survival evaporated 80%. My sense of love and belonging collapsed, like when the high facilitators cut off your email account so that you can, to hide their secret. Your love and belonging is shrinking. Your self-esteem is shrinking because partly that belief dynamic I said where aggression is unlovable and bad, so I don't want to be aggressive. But it's the only way I know how to survive, and I'm feeling like a caged animal. And so my sense of self is going down because I don't want to be aggressive, but I'm being more aggressive than I've ever been in my life. But my self-esteem is collapsing. And then in asking Peter Sandhill to help, support my gifts in coming into the world, and him ignoring that and, just totally deprioritizing it, again, the sense of, I can't bring who I am into this world. It's just so depressing and painful. Everyone's threatened by my truth, not appreciating it. And when your teachers, parents, and therapists all gang up to say, don't talk about this because it reveals our incompetency and we don't want to deal with it, they're in effect asking you to be children. Don't process reality logically or scientifically. Process it as a scared child needing to protect their abuser. And children will go crazy in order to protect their abuser. Their abuser wants to incestuously rape them and beat them and do this, and then say, it's because I love you. They're like, yeah, that's because you love me, right? Because that's what the abuser needs to hear. Children go crazy to protect their parents' insanity from coming to light because the parent can't deal with their insanity, and the child can't deal with a parent that can't deal with themselves, because that's an incredibly, unpredictable and scary parent. So the love in the part of Peter Sandhill and the Human Awareness Institute facilitators did not extend enough to care, and did not care enough to see, and did not see enough to empathize, and did not empathize and see enough to understand, and then empathize some more, and then check in and say, how are we doing? How do you feel now? How do you feel this? And are your needs going up, or are they collapsing? It was take it or leave it. We're doing this. If it hurts you, we're doing it anyway. This isn't our issue. It's a complete dominance protocol, back to chauvinism and concentrated power. Complete secrecy protocol. Don't tell anyone. We'll love you if you don't tell anyone. And this is when love and competency gets schizophrenic. When you tell little Jenny at 6 years old, this will be our little secret. You see, Daddy likes to put his penis there, but don't tell Mom. You will ruin her life. You, the 6-year-old, will ruin your mother's life. Don't tell anyone. And little Jenny wants the popsicle, right? You gonna give me a popsicle? Yes, because we have our little secret, right? When competency is so divorced from love, you have failure, pain, unhappiness, misery, and it escalates. It escalates until it reaches sanity. At some point, for little Jenny not to be insane for the rest of her life, she has to face the fact that that wasn't love because it wasn't competent. And it wasn't competent because 99% of the time when daddies do that with 6-year-old, the result is not good for the 6-year-old. It doesn't help with their self-esteem. It destroys it. It doesn't integrate you in the culture. You have to you now, in a cult that is shame-based and secret-based, you've got to hide the truth from your entire peer base because they're too unloving and incompetent to deal with it. So you've now alienated this person for life, because if she talks about incest at the dinner table, the statistical odds of that producing more healthy, loving support in a work environment or in a social or dating environment are very low. So she's going to be rewarded for doing the opposite of the healthy behavior, which is to be transparent. A sick cult punishes the healthy. In this case, a sick cult that can't deal with its shadow punishes the abuse survivor for revealing its inadequacy, just like the abuser. The ultimate abuser is the cult paradigm. And cult paradigms do not like change. They like certainty and familiarity. So you have a destruction of this thing, and you have a denial. You have the word being thrown around everywhere with no reference to the underlying competency, which is never divorced from impact. Impact and competency go hand in hand. You don't say, I'm a very competent doctor, I really care about you, and I cut off the wrong leg, because that just happens sometimes. Sorry about that. I cut off the wrong leg. Never mind. Come back tomorrow. We'll have another round. I love you so much. No. If you love someone so much, you develop a protocol that means you don't cut off the wrong leg. When the person screams and says, that's the wrong leg, you don't put the gas mask on and put them under deeper so that you can get back to work with your sawing without the irritation of your client gesticulating. And so you don't cut off the wrong leg when there's an adequate amount of love. The deeper the love, the deeper the competency. Because the deeper the seeing, the deeper the understanding, the deeper the intimacy. Competency leads to success. Success leads to happiness in this framework, which leads to gratitude and love. Now the circle completes. Now the person you competently loved loves you back. And now you've got synergies like you've never believed. But both people have to go through that journey. I've got to love you enough to succeed at making you happy in not enabling your addictions. You see, this is where you need a definition of love, something that High has never offered me. You need a definition of love. And the best definition to kind of, while you're in training wheels, is meeting human needs. If someone loves you so much, they persuaded you to get fired so that they could have a weekend tryst in the mountains. And now you can't support your children, and they're off having a new tryst with somebody else. That's not a good definition of love. The impact of love has to be one of supporting one's ability to meet one's human needs, which means caring enough to care about the other person's needs. And in that sense, love is a transcendent act, because to be loving is not about you as an adult. I need you, child. I want you, adolescent. I am committed to being loving with you and for you in such a way as facilitates your freedom and your facilitation of your personal needs. You're meeting your personal adult love. The adult love is the only love that is about the other. Child love, self-centered. Adolescent love, all about me. I need you. I want you. I want to fuck you. All child and adolescent. It's great. It's wonderful. There's nothing wrong with it if there's an adult in the driving seat that's saying, yes, I do want to have sex with you, and I do, but I'm not willing to destroy your life to do it. I'm not willing to damage your relationship with your best friend to do it. So I will be the parent to my own child and adolescent rather than asking the world to. Now, trends are another dimension of this whole thing. And in the dimension of trends, I was making another video, so I'll just reference this. The movement from masculine to feminine, from hardware to software, is occurring as the user interface and the user experience becomes the primary selling point for any product, service, or anything the way it makes the person feel. That's feminine. So even in a chauvinistic culture where we all understand that money is more important than people, that's what capitalists do and think because they're capitalists, they're not peopleists. Why were communists such horrible people? Well, they focused on people more than money. And we all know that doesn't work. And certainly in a centralized dictatorial framework and all that, it doesn't appear to. But the movement from masculine to feminine values is a necessary survival direction for the species, and it is in flux. The violations that have taken place between myself and the Human Awareness Institute are in the terrain of my feminine. Under the influence of psychedelics, my feminine emerged and was met with a variety of resistance and cloud and fear, etc., by someone in a masculine position. The leader, the therapist, the professional, the older man, in relationship to the innocence and vulnerability of the feminine born in the psychedelic journey, but the older man with agendas of fear, of ignorance, of shame, etc., to obscure rather than embrace that femininity. This is the violation of this trend. It wasn't the chauvinistic parts of me that got damaged. It was the most innocent and feminine parts within me that have sustained the most damage. Now, the male to female power is another of the trends. This doesn't have too much, influence, either way. There were both males involved. The central to decentralized power is one aspect of healing chauvinism, because centralized power is everything is at the point, masculine. Decentralized power, everything is in the circle, feminine. So one of the big themes going on here is the question, will anyone challenge the centralized dysfunctional power to ensure more centralized power or decentralized power? Where this is where the community has the power and the leader is a representative as opposed to the leader concentrating the power. Complexity is a direction. We're moving from simplicity to complexity, and with complexity to more ecological awareness. This again is simple dogma to more complex thinking, more complex awareness. Complex awareness requires complex language because we are aware in the context of language. We're also looking at transcultural intelligence, which will accelerate significantly with artificial intelligence. The reason is an artificial computer, if you ask it the best way to bury someone, for example, in terms of create the most well-being and the least amount of pollution, they're not going to say have a mahogany cask sent from Peru, then have two people work night and day to reconfigure the body, then pump the body full with chemicals, then have a big building that sits empty most of the time. Everyone has to wear special black clothes and do this, then do this, then do this, then dig a hole in the ground, then pay, $30,000 in various maintenance and other fees and go into debt. And there you are, you've got a highly toxic body in the ground waiting to bleed its chemicals out in the environment. The AI is going to look and say, aha, here's this tribe over here that does it all in a day, laying the body into a 6-foot hole, planting rose gardens around it, and grieving in a way that releases the need for therapy. That's got the better approach. And so when you look at intelligence, the efficiency, and that's one of the dimensions is intelligence. If you look at intelligence, the efficiency with which energy is transformed to human well-being, cultures are bizarrely inefficient, in terms of going out of their way to maintain normalcy, some past tradition long past its due date of expiring, simply because it's giving a sense of certainty in a traumatized culture that doesn't know how to deal with trauma. Decentralized media is an important thing here. So we have the Human Awareness Institute cutting off my connection to Heartbeat, cutting off my connection to NorCal Announce, suing, so that the website that I produced would not be seen by as many people, and encouraging me strongly to keep secret and not telling anyone. To my knowledge, not a single facilitator or team member has told the whole community what's gone on. So there's a collusion of it. The only thing that gets said about this is what the facilitators choose to say. So you have concentrated media. And this is the same thing. This is why WikiLeaks is so important. When you've got CIA officers in every one of the main media portals, when the vice president will call up Time magazine and say, we can't have this story coming out. That's why Snowden was necessary. The vice president convinced the New York Times not to run with the story of constitutional violation. And Snowden saw that. And so he chose to be a whistleblower. When the only narrative is the official narrative, regardless of its corrupt deviation from the underlying reality, you stunt the intelligence of the entire organization. You run on faulty data. You need an accurate map of reality, which means you need clear access to data. Centralized power structures are terrified of data because the ultimate data supports more decentralized power. And so if you create your identity, and in shame-based chauvinistic cultures, your value is linked to the degree that you have power over other people. And so if you lose some of that, you lose some of your value, which is a faulty belief out of a faulty paradigm of chauvinism. So when you have the trend towards decentralized media with YouTube and stuff, that's what we see as a tension here. So High at various times has shut down, much as the US government at various times puts an enormous emphasis on its ability to control the story and punish those who tell the truth. So here we have the blossoming into a paradigm in which one party or one government cannot control the media. Edward Snowden is giving lectures and TED Talks and university lectures around the country to respond medicinally to the control paradigm. Decentralized media. High is on the wrong side of the fence here. Then we have linear and geometric potential, or from lineal potential to geometric potential. Here you deal with synergy, you have to deal with transparency, you have to deal with trustworthiness. This is a very important trend that ties in with complexity to ecological awareness. When everyone is a partner on the circle, and you look for true win-win, this is the truth of the High mission statement, not the High behavior in this terrain, is you release the geometric potential, meaning there was never a problem in this entire cycle, there still isn't, that a competent team of leaders committed to a mission cannot respond to. There is only a problem that a centralized power source cannot respond to. And that's the joke, because if Ann Watts, rather than encouraging me to be silent, had done her job and told the whole community, my client is suffering because a facilitator that I chose, trained, and unequivocally recommended to Dane, sexually abused him under the influence of psychedelics, and he's now in shock, trauma, and grief like he's never dealt with, and we need to help him as a community. You see, for Ann Watts to be in integrity took 5 minutes. But it was 5 minutes that she hasn't had in 4 years. No one made that statement of ownership and an ethical response, so that the resources and wealth in the community never got unleashed. Meanwhile, the facilitators were in a scarcity dynamic around time and everything else, because you can't control things without creating scarcity. That's what it is. This can't move there. You spend more and more of your energy controlling things and less creating. It wouldn't have taken more than 6 hours for one facilitator to heal the trauma before it became PTSD. And I asked every single one of them, please hold me, please listen to me. I am in trauma now. In a trauma-illiterate paradigm, none of the facilitators told me it was trauma. And I didn't know what it was at the time. A stranger in a cafe illuminated what the issue was. And so I learned from a stranger in a cafe what I didn't learn in 100 high workshops. Working with 4 facilitators, spending more than $150,000 in therapy, I didn't learn what I learned from a stranger in a cafe. And so we don't have love reaching the level of competency. So this is in the dimension of trends where high is and isn't on board. High is on board around the focus on relationships over money. On that in this aspect, high is consistent with these trends, but it's in a schizophrenic relationship with itself. The roles dimension is very, very important. Felicia Williams. High was very clear that this wasn't a high issue, which was a lie. So when Felicia helped me, she had to say, I'm not doing this as a high facilitator. I'm doing this because I care about you. This was dubious as well because Felicia has never trusted or even to tell me the truth about what she didn't trust. She's always had a block up with me. But she said she was doing this out of the goodness of her heart because I gave her a hug at a recent event. Not because she was a high facilitator or anything like that. And then she facilitated a couples therapy for my therapist who had abused me and gave Peter 30 minutes to rage at me, basically, in 60. And she said, well, that's it. That's what I could do out of the goodness of my heart. That escalated the abuse. You don't rage at a regressed, heartbroken, traumatized inner child who has been induced by systemic incompetence in leadership. And you don't enter, when one person has made $175 an hour to betray your trust, betray their high agreements, betray their wife, and betray the community and abuse you, that's not an equal relationship. The understanding of roles is very, very important. There's nothing wrong, as I say, fundamentally with the Human Awareness Institute facilitators. And there wouldn't be anything wrong if Peter Sandhill was a baker or a bicycle mechanic who didn't know what love is any more than the average American. We raise emotionally illiterate men. I'm sure the Australians do an equally good job in that category. So the trouble is, if you take an emotionally, psychologically, traumatically illiterate man who is at war with his own femininity and violates it, and violates any number of boundaries and stuff, they are going to violate the feminine in the client, which was done numerous times as it was being born after being violated in parental and general cult protocols of shame and brainwashing in childhood. So the rebirth, the second birth, was attacked and violated as systematically as the original murder of the inner feminine, which happens in so many men. The trouble is you can't be in the role of the teacher. You can't be in the role of the therapist. You can't be in the role of making money to abuse someone when we can do that for free. Peter refused to step out of the role. He insisted on being paid, even after becoming lovers. He wouldn't step out of the role because that would derank him socially, I'm presuming, and admit that he didn't know what he was doing and wasn't competent to play the role. You've got to pair up roles. You do not want to jump out of a plane with a parachutist who was a baker and just bought a parachute on eBay that doesn't happen to open. And says, well whoops, I thought it would be some easy money. You've got to have a growing culture. You've got to pair people who are competent with people who say they are competent, or you get insanity, you get enormous amounts of pain. And and this ties in with evolution and devolution, or evil. It's a nice paradigm, or, you spell live and evil. To grow and evolve, to die and de-evolve, depends on having an accurate map of reality and honoring it enough to follow it. When you spend more energy to go the wrong way than it would take to go the right way for all concerned, and you do it in the role of a public nonprofit, in the role of a therapist, in the role of a facilitator, in the role of a teacher of love, intimacy, and healthy relationships, in the role of community leader, and you stand by positions that are guaranteed to fail the vast majority of the time and hurt every single person involved, you have no business being in the role. Because if people trust the role, which is common in chauvinistic cultures, because if you trusted the individual, you would actually have to see who they were on the inside, and we're not about that as a cult. But if they have a certificate or a title, you don't have to learn about who they really are and their competency. You don't have to see them clearly. You just look at the bit of paper. And this is the joke that we foist upon our youngsters when we say, go to school. It doesn't matter if what you're learning is insane. It doesn't matter if you will never learn algebra. It doesn't matter that your teacher's a moron. Get that bit of paper, because you're going out into the world, into a cult that can't tell the difference between competency and incompetency from looking. What they can tell the difference of is a bit of paper. And so if you don't have that paper, you will not be hired even if you're good at doing your job. Oh my goodness, so you've got to waste a lot of your time and energy, getting that bit of paper. And this is insane. This is within the paradigm of intelligence, incredibly inefficient. So these are the dimensions that I think are most significant in this terrain. And obviously, the position, the official position by the centralized power structure of the facilitators who meet behind closed doors, the positions that they're taking are incredibly weak and painful positions for all involved, not least of which is themselves. Meaning they have to split. If we looked at the final dimension of integrity, because this is a very important dimension, when you take 1,000 strands of nylon and you twist them together into an integrated whole, you cannot break them, but you could break all 1,000 threads one by one. Integrity creates strength. When you have an integrated personality and an integrated self, you have a strong personality, someone capable of giving a lot to the community. When you have a disintegrated personality, you have someone who is erratic and weak. So you do not want your leaders to create a disintegrated personality in one of the community member. Well, when your therapist asks you to keep a shame secret against all of the data as your teacher, you split the self. Because the part of you that wants to do the right thing by the community goes this way, and the part of you that wants to be liked by your therapist goes this way. You've now split the self. So Anne is using her influence to split the psyche, to protect high secret. When you say something as an official organization, such as Jason Weston repeatedly saying this is not a high issue, but refusing to say why, when every single person who knows anything about this terrain understands that it is the most central high issue, we're now asking the client to go insane, to have a version of love that is actually crazy-making and abusive, which is dangerous. So you're splitting the actual meaning and the words. Now words start to take you in wrong directions. You're splitting language from its underlying meaning. When you do things you don't actually believe in the hope that they will work and that you have enough concentrated power to bully through them, you weaken your own self-image. How is a high facilitator living with the fact that this is being represented as not a high issue? If it's an issue for the Catholic Church eventually, that 5% of its priests were pedophilic, if it's an issue for a middle school, why wouldn't it be an issue for a public nonprofit that deals in healthy relationship and teaching sexuality, that one of their facilitators participated in massive violations, spiritually, therapeutically, sexually, relationally, verbally, etc., and was paid for it? You see, when someone is pushed into a psychedelic overdose, which I was by Peter Sandhill, it creates the same dynamic of a child with a parent. There's tremendous suggestibility. But most 6-year-old children don't have to pay for their sexual abuse. Peter Sandhill insisted on it as a tribute to how loving he was and how good he was and all that. There's a tremendous splitting going on. Think of the split, you see, and the split begins at the top and then it goes down. So if the facilitators are unable to integrate around healthy best practices, and they remain schizophrenic, we're committed to love, but our definition of love is stuff that is so shameful that we ask our clients to promise never to tell anyone, courtesy of Jason Weston sending the abuse contract. Dane, please sign this contract that you will never sue high and never tell anyone what happened. And by the way, this isn't a high issue. It doesn't get more crazy than that. But again, Jason did not love the role enough to become competent in it. And the facilitators did not want a competent leader enough to train for competence as opposed to compliance. No abusive parent wants their children grasping what abuse is, because then the abuse stops being expedient. Then they get a hard time every time they abuse. So in the dimension of integrity, one of the most disturbing aspects is that I've never been in my adult state so weakened and fragmented and torn apart in so many levels, and at the same time had support washed away to protect the abusive dynamic. Because my support was contingent upon being part of the abuse dynamic, which was the cycle of secrecy. You cannot have an intergenerational abuse cycle without secrecy. The incest that goes on from one generation to the next in our country happens because telling the truth is what's taboo. It doesn't happen because there's something fundamentally wrong with any of the individuals. It happens because when you have secrecy and shame, you can't figure out sanity and understand what's going on, and you can't get help because the priority is to keep the secret and shame hidden rather than to get help for it. Because when you have chauvinism, you shame people for needing help. And you praise people who pretend they don't need any. And so in this last of a number of other dimensions. This is kind of an overview of the dimensionality of this issue. And for high to be healthy and move from a centralized power structure to a decentralized power structure means that the leadership position within the community must be embraced and held.